I'm Michael Lachlan, Executive Director of Outreach. We're committed to celebrating the LGBTQ Catholic experience, publishing essays, articles, and resources each week at www.outreach.faith. We're excited now to bring you a variety of conversations with LGBTQ Catholics discussing a range of topics important to our community. Greg Krajewski, a gay filmmaker based in Chicago, developed this project for Outreach. Hey, Greg.
Hey there, Mike.
I'm curious, this is a question I think a lot of LGBTQ Catholics are asked during the course of their lives. How has coming out impacted you?
Oh my gosh. It's impacted every part of my life, for sure. I didn't really come out even to myself until late college. And then I spent a really long time kind of half in, half out. It's like an open secret. I was working in Catholic media. I was dating this guy who then I married. But everyone at work knew, just not anyone else. I wasn't out to our clients or anything else. I felt like I had to be really quiet about it. My family did not respond very well. I'm estranged from many of my immediate family members. And it really hasn't been the easiest thing, as you can imagine. But in that time, I've been really blessed by chosen family members, which is something that I find so important for LGBTQ people. In a very unique way, our chosen family is so important.
Yeah, coming out, the process can be difficult for folks working in the church, but anyone who comes out has different challenges and celebrations along the way. And I'm really looking forward to hearing this conversation that will touch on some of those challenges. Who are you speaking to today?
Today I'm speaking to my good friend, Maxwell Kuzma, who's a writer, filmmaker, and a trans man. I actually met him while working for that Catholic media company. And he was also in the closet then, and he and I both kind of became public, started doing more publicly around the same time. So it's been great to have a friend, someone who understands where I come from. Obviously, we've had very different experiences, but it's been great to have someone kind of to walk along as we've kind of figured out who we want to be in our public faces. And it's been really great to have someone to be able to walk with, experiencing those struggles and joys.
Well, regular readers of Outreach will certainly know Maxwell. He's written for us a number of times, and we hope you enjoy the interview. If you like what you hear, we hope you visit the website at outreach.faith, where you can sign up for weekly gospel reflections from Father James Martin, learn about our upcoming conferences, and get connected with an array of resources. Now, our discussion with Greg and Maxwell.
In the first fall after I graduated college, I began dating my now husband. Being a good Catholic, I was tormented with a sense of shame and guilt. So at one point early on, I called it off. I reached out to my mom, crying, and asked her to meet me halfway between our home in Michigan and Chicago. It was at that time that I finally came out to her. I was a complete mess about my decision to end things. I could tell, even through my grief, that my mom was pretty thrown by the information that her son was gay, but she did comfort me. Shortly after, I recognized the mistake that I made, and we started dating again. We were long distance at first. He was in LA, and I was in Chicago. I bought tickets to see him, and as I did for most things back then, I told my parents. I landed in LA to a phone call. It was my mother. She was, let's say, very upset about my decision to date him. That day changed everything for me. That was the beginning of the end of the regular, positive relationship with my parents. Estrangement is strange. It's not really death. It's closer to a breakup. Relationships naturally change and shift as the parties involved grow, but estrangement feels somehow more poignant. There is something that went wrong that shouldn't have. Something irreconcilable. The loss of my parents and sisters was a slow process, years in the making. It was a building that slowly locked down. One door would close and lock, and so I'd go around the building to another door, and it would close and lock until finally the last door is closed. It's not locked, but they're on the other side holding it shut. So what does it mean to lose something that's still there? Can I grieve the loss of a relationship? Should I grieve it in a similar way to death. I spoke to Maxwell Kuzma, who's a friend of mine, a transgender man who writes about the intersection of queerness and faith. I met him years ago when working for a Catholic media production company. In addition to the estrangement he has experienced with his family during his transition, he also lost much of the support systems and friendships he had formed in his time working in Catholic media. I began by asking him about his take on estrangement.
I definitely automatically think about my personal situation. I think about my parents and about how I wanted to have a certain type of relationship with them moving forward as an adult. But certain things happened where there were disagreements, and it caused us to need to have some distance between us.
Is that like distance? That's like the estrangement is like the disconnect, the distance there?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, like, I also have maybe like a formal definition. It's a funny topic because there's discomfort around it. And I think part of that is social, where as a society, people aren't always comfortable with estrangement. I remember when I first started talking about it like a little bit publicly on Facebook, or just with people like in my more immediate circles. So I wasn't talking about it with like strangers on the internet. I was talking about it with like people I knew or acquaintances. A lot of people would say things like, well, they're your parents. They're always going to love you. Or like, you need to give them another chance on da-da-da-da-da. You know what I mean? Things like that. But it comes down to you. And again, the being an adult part is important to me, because I think, parents can impose certain guidelines on children, but when it's adult to adult, you can't be demanding the same sort of things that you can when someone is a child. They just so I know I'm going all over the place here, but those are like different things that come up for me.
No, you brought up something that resonates with me a lot, which is this idea of love. So when I think of estrangement, I'm thinking of like a loss of a positive relationship. For my parents, there's very little interaction. There's very little communication at all. Whereas in your case, you talked about people coming up to you and saying, your parents still love you. My parents tell me they still love me, and I believe them. But that doesn't mean that the interactions we have are positive or healthy. I think about this idea of irreconcilable differences. When I think about my talking about this subject matter, even when talking to people who are really affirming and positive, I still find myself dancing around what we're actually talking about. So the fact that my parents are not affirming of my relationship with my husband, they still say that they love me very much. They still say that they love us, but it's for them an irreconcilable difference where they believe that what I'm doing is so harmful to myself, harmful to the people who see this happening, and harmful to my husband, that they can't be perceived as affirming any part of it, which ultimately ends up being me, very unaffirming of me. And that's where that unhealthy relationship comes from. And so, I think for me, estrangement is the loss of that regular positive relationship.
I think there's also an element of you and I, the two people who are estranged, we view the relationship differently. Like when you say irreconcilable differences, it's like, for me, I view the relationship as needing to have these terms, but you're viewing the relationship under different terms. And maybe it's not even just terms, but also like the nature of a relationship, or the order of it, because like your parents love you, but they like don't think you're doing the right thing. Like that sentiment, that feeling impacts how both of you are approaching, the relationship. I liked what you said about the loss, I think you said the loss of a positive relationship. Is that how you put it? I like that because I think that's another good way to do it. And that also, as a definition, that also kind of pulls in that shame piece that I was trying to hint at. The shame of society doesn't really know what to do about this. We're supposed to always look up to our parents and kind of have them on a little bit of a pedestal, like maybe, still deferring to them, those types of feelings. And then I also wanted to touch on what you said about love. My parents do, when I do interact with them, I have different terms for each of my parents under which I interact with them. And it's like, I still call it estrangement because it's way dialed down from like what I would prefer as to how I would interact with the people that raised me, gave birth to me, and all that. But the love portion, they definitely always say that, and they always say that they're praying for me and those things. And like, I do also believe that. I do also love them. But that piece also feels complicated to me because it's like the classic issue for LGBTQ people in general. What does it mean for someone to say they love you, but maybe not want to support you or to affirm you or to recognize the love that you have for the people in your life? So this is not a topic that is often really just like discussed in this way. And I really do think there's a lot of shame around it. Even when I am in a situation where I would want to reference my parents, or maybe somebody that I've just met kind of asks me something, I find myself wanting to soften it. I'm like, well, I don't really talk to them about that. Like, I'm not going to be like, my parents and I have irreconcilable differences and we are on opposite ends and because like, it's not how I want it to be. And we don't have space for that discussion in society.
When I think about the process by which my estrangement from my parents happened, it was really long. It was about 6 years. When I started, it was before I started dating my now husband. Most of my family knew that I was gay, and they had no problem with it. No one said anything to me. No one warned me about anything that would be a red flag for them. But it took about 6 years. And one of the frustrating things for me was, I think both of us, both sides, my parents and I, would both see this as the other side closing doors. So I see this as, I come to them with my boyfriend, they're not happy about it. There's some things that they did that they have apologized for. So my mom would randomly call me from time to time and just basically yell at me for what was happening, for like me being in this relationship. And she has essentially apologized for that. But it doesn't take away what she believed, like what she was saying, she still believes. I think on one hand, I could theoretically still be in a semi-positive relationship with my parents, but it would be on their terms being, we don't want to see or hear from your husband. We don't want to hear about your husband. And it was just such a toxic thing for so long, both for my relationship with my husband, which is, after God, the second most important relationship I have. It was just this process of realizing that for me to keep trying to enter into the house, and I'd be curious to hear someday how my parents feel about it, because based on some of the things they've said to me, they see this as, I have done this to myself. I have put myself in this situation, and they're just doing the best they can to make sure that they're not encouraging me to go down this path that is harmful. I'm curious about then, what was the process for you? What was this process of estrangement for you?
My story of estrangement centers around the fact that I'm transgender. I decided that I wanted to come out as transgender to my parents specifically. And so when that happened, I was living far enough away from them that I needed to Skype to do so. And I had my therapist with me. And when I told them, I just had to blurt it out because there was really no way to like build up to that. So I was just like, well, I'm transgender and I'm going to start transitioning. And there was just like a moment where the unspeakable had entered the room, you know, like this thing we were always kind of dancing around, and we never addressed directly either, kind of like this pattern that I was experiencing in my work world. Now suddenly it's here. What are we going to do? How are we going to react? And then my mom like stood up very intensely because, you know, my parents were sitting at the computer to Skype. My mom just stood up and said, "That's a political word. Like, I don't agree with this. Like, turn off the computer, basically. Turn off the call." That reaction didn't give me an impression that now we're suddenly estranged. That was just, oh, maybe there's a miscommunication here about what I'm saying or like what I mean. But at the same time, it really illustrates sort of how we arrived at this point, because if you do believe that somebody's identity is just like a political thing, like I'm being politically correct about myself somehow, it would make sense that you would not really validate or recognize it if you feel that it's in that category. We then started to have kind of more regular conversations, which it's just so interesting because thinking about it now, like if this happened like today with everything I know now, like everything I've experienced now, and someone reacted like that, I don't think that my first thought would be, yes, talking further at great length is going to magically clear this up. Like, basically what I'm saying is I think now I know that was enough of a disagreement that what I did next, like I know now it wasn't effective. Like I know now why. But what I tried to do was I tried to listen a lot. I remember multiple 40 to 60 minute Skype sessions where it was mostly my mom talking. And my mom was kind of going through the whole thing. She would go through, my least favorite was that she would scour the internet and dredge up every single anti-trans, transphobic piece of content that she could find. I mean, I'm not going to sit here and cite studies back at you if you're picking, you know, just these fringe things. But it was so frustrating because, like, the response is, so what about, like, all major medical associations? Like, do we just not care what, like, the majority of the scientists who are looking at all of this information, like, do we not care, scientists, doctors, healthcare professionals, do we not care what they say? And worse yet, do we not care what the trans community says? Do we not care about the fact that the regret rate for trans surgeries is lower than the regret rate for, like, a knee replacement?
For years, I would have conversations with my parents and sisters. I would prepare for these conversations. I would grab some article or pull up some new thought and take some notes. I would ask them to take just a minute to imagine that they were in my shoes to see things from my point of view. But these conversations always ended up feeling really one-sided. I never felt truly equipped to speak to them. I never knew what to say. I was always on the defensive, afraid of the reaction, afraid of my own mind. I still had so many questions for myself. I had done the research. I knew what the church officially taught. I knew why it taught that. I knew what they were going to say, and I didn't have a satisfactory answer. Even recently, I found myself back in my hometown and in a conversation with one of my more scrupulous sisters. She was determined to communicate to me the pain and the scandal that I had caused through my actions, and I didn't have a satisfactory answer for her. At the time, I was angry and frustrated. Looking back, what stands out is how certain she was, how much she seemed to be hurt by my marriage. I just don't know how to respond to that. That's where I am now. I don't know what to say that I haven't already said. I don't really think that facts and figures will convince anyone of anything anymore. We live in this post-truth society. All that's left is people's stories and experiences. But how do you share that when getting close elicits such a strong negative response? As we grow, our relationships shift and change, but this is something unique. I have lost something that I won't ever get back. It feels as if no bridge can be built to connect us again. I asked Max about what he's lost. What did he have before that was lost as a result of the estrangement?
Well, a good example that comes to mind immediately when you bring up, I guess, the emotional aspect. A lot of my life was spent, wanting to have not just the approval, but also the pride of my parents. I wanted my parents to be proud of me. And I think it's like, I don't know, it feels so trite to say that. But it really, really, really was important to me. In a lot of ways, it felt like the main way that I could connect with my parents when I was growing up was look at this thing that I did. That wanting to make them proud, that feeling was very tied up in doing all the Catholic stuff too, because it's like, oh, I'm not just a normal kid. I'm the kid who is like doing the important stuff for the church that totally aligns with what we all believe. Like that sentiment right there is just so loaded. Like we could probably do another full podcast on that sentence that I just said. It's just so, just the idea that we have to be on the same page and we all have to think the same things and we have to care about the same issues, and then we're going to blast the world with this message, right? Like, and I'm sure especially both of us also as working in media now, this ties into grief because now I do things that are not, I'm on board with that messaging, even us talking about this now, not only is it socially taboo, but it's also kind of taboo within that relationship. But not even just this, it's the fact that I speak publicly about how Catholicism is important to me and being trans is important to me. That is the 404 page not found for them. That's the wall. We hit a wall as soon as that happens. And I recently wrote something for a Catholic publication that did really well. It was trending. And after that happened, I remember very clearly the emotions, because on the one hand, I was super proud of myself for being able to write something that people wanted to read and that people were getting value from. After that accomplishment, like it felt like an accomplishment for sure, because I felt that I had reached people, but I actually had this deep sadness. And for like 2 days, I kept being like, why do I feel weird about this? Because I wasn't really letting myself go there. I was like talking to my friends like, well, this is really good for my writing career, right? Now I can do X, Y, Z, and I can write other stuff, whatever. But really, I finally went face to face with the emotion, and I ended up like crying for like 30 minutes because I realized that my parents would never be proud of that. I'm doing things now that my parents would never be proud of. And that felt super, super significant because that's a lot of what that relationship was based on before. We used to be walking together somewhere similar. And then maybe all this time when I was a child and all this time I thought, oh yeah, we're all walking to the same place. And then suddenly we came to a fork in the road, and they, not just my parents, but like this group of people too, you know, the people that were my friends and acquaintances, all in this same worldview, they all were like, oh yeah, we go left here. And I was like, but like, wait, like my understanding of everything we've been doing this whole time is that we go right. I've seen tweets about this from people who have left the evangelical church, where it's like, you know, all these years you taught us that this was what Jesus would do, but now that we're saying, oh, so Jesus would help XYZ people, or Jesus would welcome XYZ people, but now suddenly you're saying we shouldn't do that? Like, there's that's like the big divergence too.
For me, it feels like we were walking together and the road split because there was a gorge that formed, and I feel like we're still walking in the same direction, but we're not walking next to each other anymore. Like, they're all the way over there, and there's this cycle of kind of grace and frustration that I think about a lot, which is God made us this way. He made people with free will, and there's no way he didn't know what would happen in 2024 or beyond, whatever. He knew all of this. I personally believe that he called me to this life, that he called me to marriage, and that he's calling me to this kind of work. The frustration is, why? Why did he do that? Because he knew, if he knew that, then he also knew that
it would hurt.
That my parents were going to react in this way, and that there was going to be this chasm between us. And my parents don't think that we're walking in the same direction. And I do. I have 3 sisters, and 2 of my 3 sisters I don't talk to anymore. And they were my friends, and I miss those friendships. I was on good terms with my parents. I was just starting to develop adult relationships with them. They're the reason I'm still Catholic. Like, if it wasn't for my parents and the way they raised me and the importance they put on the Mass and on Jesus and on prayer and everything else, I wouldn't be here. I think a lot about the loss of spiritual guides. Switching it over to this idea of the church, I feel like I was led here. I feel like God wants me to be where I am. It's that connection to the church that is the reason why my parents and I are estranged, is their connection to the church and my connection to the church. I'm curious if you have felt anything like that.
Yeah, for sure. One of the things that I attach to the most from the church, from theology, like probably even more important than the Eucharist, which is, I think, kind of drilled into all of us as like the Catholic thing, like the utmost Catholic thing. And I think I thought that was the utmost Catholic thing for a really long time, but realized in time that there is something even more important to me personally. It's along the lines of the youth group thing of God doesn't make mistakes, but it goes further, because it's the intentionality of God creating you exactly as you are for this purpose. So you have something to give to the world that only you can give, which is why God made you exactly how you are. And like, as a LGBTQ person, how can I not hear that and see that as like the fullness of me? And that became a frustration for me over time, because it seems self-evident to me that like it would mean, if you do believe that it would mean that LGBTQ people have so much to give, like directly because of our identity, like not in spite of, which I think is often the position that's taken. It's like, well, yeah, you can still do great stuff, but you just have like you're going to have a harder time because you don't get to be true to those parts of yourself. You have to conform yourself to this cisgender, heterosexual view of the person. Like, you have to be that. If you have to forsake your identity in that way. ask any LGBTQ affirming person, and it just doesn't make sense. It just doesn't make sense that you would have to break off a part of yourself when all the other theology says it's the fullness of you. But for many years, in spite of the fact that I always had this very strong belief in this theological concept, it was difficult for me to disentangle the church in all the myriad ways, the people, the theology, the way that people use theology on the internet, which, spoiler alert to people, is also not what the actual hierarchy teaches. You know what I mean? Like, there's a difference between your favorite conservative Catholic blogger and Pope Francis. Like, if you're Catholic, then you are supposed to believe that there's a big difference there. But anyway, like, for a while, I felt like I was wandering without a home. Like, I was like, this thing that always felt self-evident to me as me being me is a gift to the world is now being challenged and questioned by everybody. So, like, that I knew in this world of Catholics that I was in. So what do I do? Because, like, I still believe that, but I'm feeling this resistance and this coldness, and this is not working in this iteration. So it took me a long time to disentangle that, and then ultimately to find Catholic communities that would support me. It's basically an understanding that even when everything can't be neatly tied up into an intellectual bow, like, we can't, like, go to the exact portion in the catechism where it specifically says, yes, comma, transgender people are allowed to be Catholic, period. Even when that is not the case, because that's not, transgender people still have so much that they can give to the church. And it's like, it's a difference between, again, everybody has to be thinking and feeling this exact same identical thing. And it kind of goes with the road metaphors. Like, I really see where what you're saying about we're going in the same direction, but the chasm. But it's like, are we on the same side of this chasm so that we can help each other and we can consolidate our supplies and support each other? Or are we deciding that we're going to be on opposite sides of the chasm so we can't share resources, we can't really communicate? Like, maybe I see something ahead on your side that you can't see because there's a big forest in front of you, but I see on the other side of the forest is on fire. And I'm like, hey, Greg, the forest, there's a fire over there, but I can't tell you because of this. You get what I'm saying.
I think for LGBTQ people, estrangement often comes with some sort of gain. So for me, it was knowledge and acceptance of myself. I gained a husband and a life and a purpose and a reason to keep thinking and living and learning and talking. It definitely gave me greater empathy for others. But I'm curious what you've gained, what positives have come from the action that caused the estrangement, or that is the source of the estrangement.
Yes. Being able to live fully as myself and not have to keep not showing up in relationships in my life. I mean, I almost don't even have words for it because it's like, I'm just getting to fully be me now. And I always feel frustrated talking about it because it's deeply, profoundly impactful. But it also feels like words fail. And it also feels frustrating because how is that not evidence of something good? Like, if joy is so important, and true joy, not superficial happiness, how is the joy of a transgender person, which you can typically very clearly see in photos of somebody before they transition and after, how is that not evidence of joy, evidence of a positive? And that's where the response is, well, you know, it's just this temporary high from this big transformation. And it's like, well, I'm sorry, my life still is mundane in a lot of ways. I still stub my toe. I still have to pay taxes. Like, it's not like I am living in a fantasy of oh, everything is perfect now. It's just, I'm here, I'm me, I'm actually getting to experience and experience relationships, not just like, that really is impactful. Like being able to truly be myself with other people, to be able to share my true perspective and not just like, oh, I don't really know, like, I'm not really going to comment on that, because it's in those sharings of perspective that progress happens, that, and it's not just like social progress. It's also, we learn how to solve problems in ways that we wouldn't have been able to. Again, now I'm fixated on this road metaphor, but it's true. Like if we are on the same side supporting each other, then seeing different perspectives from different people, like individuality is actually a huge strength, instead of conformity. Because then, oh, well, this person has this skill, and instead of saying don't use that skill because it's not Catholic for you to use that skill, well, if you're going to use it, then you're going to be able to add things to the group that the group would otherwise be missing.
But thank you so much, Max. This has been great to talk to you, as always.
Thank you so much for having me, Greg. It was a delight, and I actually also really do value hearing what you've experienced too. I really like that this was a two-way conversation and wasn't just, this is my story, but that we actually show, because it's a huge spectrum and it's not something that's talked about. So I think that's super valuable and important.
Despite years of estrangement with my family, the pain, the anxiety it's caused my husband and me, the helplessness and frustration I still feel from time to time, I still hold some hope. You know, we are an Easter people, after all. I often think that this would be so much easier if my family were the stereotypical card-carrying homophobes, because maybe it would be easier to shake it off or ignore it. But I know deep down that my parents want what's best for me, and that's the problem. It's this difference of opinion of what is dangerous.
This interview was written, produced, and edited by Greg Krajewski, who also composed the music. Special thanks to Maxwell Kuzma. If you like this interview, consider supporting Outreach so that we can bring you more content like this. Visit our website, outreach.faith, to donate today. Thank you.